Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for our Healing Through Creativity workshop for educators. My name is Katie Bonner, and I am a member of the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers team, which is the organization that presents the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. I'm going to ask my colleagues on the call to introduce themselves while some folks continue joining us. Dina, would you like to start?
Hi, my name is Dina Abdelhadi. I also work for the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, which is part of the Alliance for Young Artists and Writers. I'll be the tech lead today, so I'll be helping make the sound and the slides advance. If you have any tech issues, please drop those questions in the chat. If you have any visibility issues with the text or anything, we'll also be adding a PDF of the presentation so you can follow on at your own pace, zoom in and out as you need, and also just have some resources for later. And go ahead and let the two presenters introduce themselves briefly. They'll give a little bit more information about themselves a little bit later as well.
Hi, I'm Donalyn Heise, and I welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're thrilled to be with you, and I want to thank you for all the work that you all do on a daily basis to help young people who've experienced all forms of trauma. So it's an honor to be here with you today. I taught art in K-12, or currently teaching in higher ed at the University of Texas at Austin. But I do want to say that Austin, Texas gets very little rain, but now there's thunderstorms coming through. So if anything happens, we have backup, but I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that I stay with you the whole time. And now, Adrienne.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Hunter. I'm a retired art educator. I'll tell you more about myself later on, but suffice it to know that I am just thrilled to be here with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So before we jump in and get started, we would love to open up a poll to hear from all of you. So today's session will be very interactive. Donalyn and Adrienne will be leading us through some activities in the lesson plan guide that they created, Healing Through Creativity. And so we would love to hear from you all. Have you led art projects or discussions about grief in your classroom before? So I'm launching the poll now if you just want to take a few moments to reply. And while you're all replying, I do want to share that subtitles are available in today's session. You can turn them on by going to the three dots at the bottom of your screen where it says more and enabling subtitles. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and share the results of our poll. So our question was, have you led art projects or discussions about grief in your classroom? And I am seeing that most people on our call today have not, but we have a few people who have talked about mental health, but aren't quite sure if they've led a formal discussion or activity about it. And about 32% of folks joining us said that they have led art projects or discussions about grief in your classroom. So you all might feel right at home, but as you can see, we have a variety of experiences entering the room, and we are thrilled to have all of you here. I think that there'll be a lot of time for us to learn from Donalyn and Adrienne, share our own experiences, and learn from each other. So to briefly go over the agenda for today, we're going to start with just an introduction to scholarships for teens experiencing grief as available through the Scholastic Awards, and how your students can participate with them, possibly with the works that they create through the lessons that you lead after today's workshop. And then from there, we're going to hand it over to Donalyn and Adrienne to really walk us through the Healing Through Creativity art guide and their expertise about trauma-sensitive resilience approach to art. Then we're going to stop for some questions for Donalyn and Adrienne. And finally, we're going to close with some next steps for any of your students who are interested in applying for scholarships, and next steps for you all to continue connecting with each other as a community. So to jump right in with some scholarship opportunities for your students. You can learn more by visiting artandwriting.org, which I'm going to drop in the chat right now. But by way of brief introduction, I will share that the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards is the largest national scholarship and recognition program for creative teens in the country. It is open to all teens ages 13 and up who are located in the United States, Canada, or US territories and military bases abroad. Through applying to the Scholastic Art and Writing Award, students have the opportunity to earn scholarships up to $10,000 in addition to being recognized for publication through publications, exhibitions, and in-person and virtual now ceremonies celebrating their work and their achievements. Students can apply in up to 28 categories of art and writing. And in addition to applying through a category of art and writing, they also have the option to be considered for scholarships related to certain themes, such as the New York Life Award. The New York Life Award offers $1,000 scholarships to 16 from anywhere in the country or eligible areas for the Scholastic Awards, whose work, whether it be art or writing, explores concepts of personal grief, loss, and bereavement. Educators and students who win those awards are eligible to receive a $250 cash award as well. So something nice to bring home to your classrooms after supporting your students through this process. And there are certain states in which students can win $500 scholarships as well. I know some of you may be joining us from Arizona, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, Ohio, and Tennessee. So any of your students in those states are also eligible to win these $500 scholarships for work on the same theme. And the Scholastic Awards are currently open for entries. Deadlines begin December 1st, but vary by region. So we'll go over at the end how you can get started supporting your students through that process if you are interested in participating. And with that brief introduction, I would love to turn it over to Adrienne and Donalyn to get us started on healing through creativity.
Hi, and thank you so much for coming. If you haven't already done so, would you please introduce yourself and tell in the chat and tell us where you're from? It's so interesting to see where everybody's working and living and coming from. I'm Donalyn Heise. I've taught for decades in K-16 classrooms. And one of the things that always interested me is how is it that some students who faced adversity, grief, and loss seem to bounce back while others seem to struggle. And that led me to my work on resilience through art. I had the pleasure of working with Adrienne Hunter, developing the Healing Through Creativity Visual Art Educator's Guide. I use art for fostering resilience in youth who've experienced all types of trauma. And Adrienne and I really feel strongly that this guide is really beneficial to people who have experienced grief and loss, but also beneficial for all types of trauma. So again, today we're going to kind of talk about what is a trauma-sensitive resilience approach to art teaching, and then briefly go over some of the lessons in the guide. And then we're going to kind of do a deep dive in one of the lessons, and you'll get to make some art, and hopefully you'll have some takeaway, something you can use in your own practice after the webinar.
Thanks, Donalyn. Hi, I'm Adrienne Hunter. I was an art teacher for over 35 years with the Allegheny Intermediate Unit in Pennsylvania. As a full-time itinerant art teacher, K through 12, I taught at 9 schools a week. My students were in shelter schools, crisis centers, alternative education programs, and/or maximum security institutions. All of my students experience grief and loss as well as other forms of psychological trauma. I'd like to share one of my early experiences. I was teaching a group of students, and I heard them discussing an incident in their neighborhood where somebody was shot in the street. And, you know, we're hearing more and more about street violence, but I have to tell you, this happened 35 years ago, and it made me realize how important my lessons needed to be in dealing with the issues that my students were experiencing at home. So tonight, you'll need to have an open mind and a desire to have fun. To participate in our exercises, you will need paper, glue, scissors, marking tools such as pens, pencils, markers, and red yarn, ribbon, or some sort of red marking tool. Optionally, you may want to use items to embellish your work, such as buttons, beads, lace, sequins, paints, or other found objects.
So the question that guides our work is, how can we meet learners' academic, artistic, social, emotional needs without re-traumatizing them? So important things to remember that we're not art therapists, we are educators. We use art for expression, to express feelings when words fail, and to empower them. But we also need to be sensitive in our approach. We don't want to force them to relive their past traumas. So instead of asking what happened to you, we can ask what helps you get through a difficult time. And let's make art about that. We can use sources of strength and joy as ideation for art making.
Under the provisions of the Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, which we know as CAPTA, teachers are mandated by law to report child maltreatment. All teachers should make themselves aware of their school policies and procedures for reporting abuse and neglect. The best thing that you as a teacher can do for your students is provide them with a safe learning environment. This means safe emotionally as well as physically. Remember the old saying about sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me? Well, that is absolutely not true. Words can and do cut very deeply. We have to model respect and sensitivity.
So art and creativity can provide a safe space to express feelings and emotions, but it can also foster resilience and empower individuals to be a change agent in their own lives by visually articulating individual strengths and assets. So resiliency, as we know, is the ability to bounce back, to model, to successfully adapt, to cope, to develop social, academic, and vocational competence despite exposure to the stress that is all around us. And resilience theory is actually the belief in the ability of every person to overcome adversity if important protective factors are present in that person's life. So we know that the arts are magical. All of the arts are magical, but what is it exactly that we do? And when young people are engaged in art, it provides an opportunity for them to strengthen things that foster resilience. And those include pride in personal accomplishment, resourcefulness, knowing what our resources are and how to access them, creativity, persistence or grit, metacognition or thinking about our thinking, having a vision for our future, a sense of purpose, a sense of humor and optimism. And we can strengthen those protective factors by implementing an innovative curriculum and nurturing pedagogy. So if we try to find authentic learning experiences where they can work individually and collaboratively, we can model that strength or asset-based approach. So by understanding the characteristics of resiliency, we are able to be an advocate for our learners who've experienced trauma and can help them avoid the cycle of failure or low expectations that can lead to adverse outcomes. So I commend you for being here to learn more about trauma, grief, resiliency, and other factors that can impact education. So now we're going to take just a minute with our first activity. It's going to be a 1-minute writing activity. And I want you to stop and think about a time in your life where you experienced grief or loss. Think about a time that was difficult or challenging. And I'm going to ask you to write on paper or pen, wherever you are, and keep writing as long as the timer's on, and the timer is our music. So when the music stops, we'll stop. But I want you to know ahead of time that we're not going to ask you to share your moment of grief or what caused your trauma. But I want you to write solid for 1 minute. Don't let your pen stop. If you could come to a stopping point finish the sentence that you're on. I want to thank you for writing that. We know that writing and creating art can be cathartic to help us get that out. We're going to use this moment in your time to build on, but I want to take this time to say sometimes when students who've experienced grief and loss and other forms of trauma, when they come into the art room, they really just want to be a kid and enjoy art and forget about their trauma for a while. So we have to be sensitive to that as well, which is one of the reasons why if I'm going to build this into an activity, I don't have them relive their trauma. We're going to take this and build upon it. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne, who's going to share one of the other lessons in the visual guide.
This lesson, as well as all of the lessons we discussed today, include goals, background information, step-by-step instructions, a discussion on reflecting, sharing, and giving feedback, national visual arts standards, and assessment rubrics, and can be found in the Healing Through Creativity. Everything we talk about tonight is in that guide. So please download it for free because it's great. So before we can start our art making tonight, I'd like to briefly tell you about one of the other lessons in the guide. You can have your students make masks to celebrate and honor loved ones through clay. We chose 3 readings: Seasons by William Schenk, To the Dead Bird in the Parking Lot by Amanda Chen, and My Elephant and Me by Alexa Russell, and 3 quotes: In the Depth of Winter by Albert Camus, God Puts Rainbows in Clouds by Maya Angelou, and Turn, 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 song lyrics by Pete Seeger, inspired by Ecclesiastes 3, 1-8, for our discussion to prepare for the art making lesson. Next, creating with clay can be healing. Very healing. The process of working with clay can be very therapeutic. Clay can be shaped and reshaped, encouraging the freedom to take risks. First, you wedge the clay, pounding it to release the air bubbles and making it more pliable. Wedging and kneading the clay are appropriate outlets to release anger, tension, and frustration. The action of smoothing the clay, molding it, manipulating it, building with it, taking away from it, and reworking it makes clay a very soothing and forgiving medium with which to work. The process of working with clay reestablishes a sense of order to art, if not to the rest of the universe. We can't stress enough the protective factors of resiliency, so have listed them here, and we will be addressing them throughout this webinar. The learning outcomes of the MASK project are to identify themes of grief and the resilience provided by traditions, symbols, and ceremonies, to create a clay mask utilizing symbols to honor loved ones who have passed, and to develop a new tradition or ceremony using the mask worn or displayed to celebrate the life of the loved one, to help make connections between art and life by presenting your mask in ceremony, explaining the symbols you used and how one can draw strength and joy from the process of creating, and exhibiting your mask as part of a display to advocate for the importance of art in school. Due to time constraints, I'm not able to give you the entire lesson now. However, you can find the lesson in full on pages 14 through 28 in the Healing Through Creativity Visual Arts Educator Guide. This lesson can be adapted for distance learners. Through the use of technology and social media, the students can communicate with and receive feedback from their teachers and peers. The mask making process and the ceremonial presentation can be documented through videos and photos. Recipes for air dry or oven baked clay can be easily made at home by using ingredients commonly found in pantries. Kits can be made available if necessary. All of the lessons we share with you can be creatively adapted for students grade 1 through 12 and for most student ability. Art, like life, is all inclusive. Okay. I'd like to share two samples that can be used to reflect and share. Imagine yourself as an anthropologist who has found your mask in evidence of a ceremony related to the mask and is writing a study or report on it. Include descriptions of the symbols, what the symbols might represent, what the ceremony might celebrate in the report. Sketches and/or photographs may be included. Another sample might be, next please. Another sample might be you have an opportunity to create a YouTube video of your mask and celebration ceremony. Write the script for the segment specifying all you will say. Talk about the process of making the mask and your inspiration for making the mask. Include information about the symbolism you used in designing your mask and ceremony. Enacting your ceremony, how will you speak non-verbally about the celebration of life, joy, and strength? What will you say about the person who inspired you to make this mask and ceremony? There are several more samples in the lesson plan.
Another lesson in the guide focuses on power and protection. Specifically, how can art protect us in times of pain and grief? This creative activity utilizes color pencils or any type of paint or markers that you choose and paper to create a symbolic paper shield with a decorative motif around the border, incorporating the importance of repetition and continuity. Shields have been used in many cultures for protection and as symbols of power. When experiencing trauma, the brain and the body may get stuck in survival mode. Our brain focuses on the fear, pain, dangers, signaling survival strategies of fight, flight, or freeze. The creative process can change our perspective to the gifts within that tragedy, such as our ability to cope, our strength in surviving difficult times, and our ability to recognize and embrace joy. In times of sorrow and grief, it's important to remember our sources of strength and what are our sources of joy and the coping strategies that we have within us. We brainstorm and share positive ways to cope, sources of strength and joy, and the power of creative art to communicate and make connections to the past, the present, and the future. So right now, we are going to brainstorm, think, write, and share. And I will ask you to share some of these. What do you do to help you cope when you're grieving, have suffered a loss, or some type of trauma? What brings you joy in times of challenge? Do you listen to music? Does that make you stronger? Taking your dog for a walk, talking to friends, baking, gardening, making art? Which of your own cultural practices help you cope? Make a list of those things. Create a list of all the things you can think of that make you strong. And don't forget to include things that just bring you joy. Thank you to all of you who are sharing some of those in the chat. They're wonderful reminders. So if you read something in the chat that you didn't think about, like, oh yeah, I enjoy doodling, or I enjoy traveling, or taking a walk, or yoga, you can borrow from someone else in this session tonight, because we want your list of strength and joy to be as long as possible. So that's one thing that I have students share at the with the students sitting at the tables next to them. And then we make art about that. So thank you so much, and please continue to share those things. In the poem, Peace is Only Real in a Photograph, author Phoebe D'Angelo dealt with grief by placing her uncle's photograph on the wall between pictures of her closest friends and others who made a difference in her life. And she writes, and I quote, "I see his smile first, but then his eyes. I see joy, love, and compassion." Remembering the joy can help us cope with grief and pain. The creative arts can provide a safe space to express emotions, but can also strengthen resilience. In this lesson, we cut out a large geometric shape to create a shield. And I asked my students, what shape will your shield be? A circle, rectangle, diamond, or organic shape? I asked them to choose 2 or 3 symbols to take their list that you just made, create 2 or 3 symbols of strength, and create a repetitive pattern around the border of their shield. And I asked them, what colors will you use and why? What symbols will you use? Then I asked them to design the center of their shield by adding images of animals, people, places and things, events that bring them joy and strength. What principles and elements of design will you focus on to help you communicate effectively and create an interesting composition? Then I have them write an artist statement that describes the choices that they made in the design, what their symbols represent, what inspired and motivated them. And then I have them reflect on what they do to cope in times of grief, loss, and crisis. With every lesson in the guide, we have discussion and reflection prompts such as these, and we highlighted a few that we thought were especially relevant to healing through creativity, like in what ways do we shield ourselves from pain and grief? And in what role does repetition play in healing? What's worth repeating? Some things are worth repeating, like kindness and being good to ourselves, and other things are not worth repeating, like negative self-talk. So how can we use our shield as a reminder of our strength and our power instead of creating art about the trauma?
The Red Thread Multimedia Fiber Art Project. An invisible red thread connects those who are destined to meet, regardless of time, place, or circumstance. The thread may stretch or tangle, but will never break. This was a Chinese proverb. For this lesson, we investigate and discuss It Is What It Is by Michaela Walk and Pulling Tight by Zhou Chen. The theme or big idea for this lesson is creating an unbreakable bond. When something bad happens in life, how can one pick up the pieces and start over? How can art help us express our feelings and emotions when we don't have the words to share? How can we stay strong for the people we love? In what ways can we express ourselves as an individual, but yet be part of a group that makes up a whole? Navigating difficult times is often an individual process. Being part of a group can promote healing. Through the exploration of a variety of art media and process, students will experience trauma-sensitive art studio practices by non-verbally expressing their feelings and emotions in a safe space. Students will create one individual fiber art block to keep and will contribute one to the group product that will be publicly displayed. One constant in each student's work is the red thread that connects us all. Students will work as a team to aesthetically arrange the blocks into a final arrangement. For our activity today, we will be working with paper and whatever media you have to use. At the end of the webinar, we will attempt to use Flipgrid to share our work. Next. Nope. Okay, reflect on a time. I jumped ahead of myself. Reflect on a time. Now I lost myself. How about that? Okay. Reflect on the time when you experienced grief or loss. Experiment with a variety of art media to create a paper rectangle approximately 8.5 by 11 inches. Position your paper in a portrait orientation and write, paint, stamp, embellish. What colors, what marks will you make to express your feelings and emotions? Somewhere on your rectangle, create a red thread that travels off the page in two places. Your red thread can be made from yarn, thread, paint, marker, lipstick, or whatever you have. Have fun. Okay, next. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about borders here. What are borders and boundaries? We all have boundaries that we know that we shouldn't cross. We also know the old expression, don't color outside the lines. Sometimes the reasons for borders and boundaries make sense, and sometimes they seem like an imposition or annoyance. Other times they give you a sense of security. We're going to create a border around our block. This would be your stitching line later if you were sewing the blocks together and serve as a reminder to end your design within the boundaries. One of the reasons for that is if you were sewing it together and you had beads or buttons that went right off the edge of your block, you wouldn't be able to sew through it. So if you're not sewing it together, the border creates the illusion of a frame for each piece. We will create a border about 3 inches around the whole paper. 3/8 inches, sorry. I have found that a popsicle stick works great for this, as it is the exact width of the border and eliminates the need for measuring. It can be placed along the edge of the paper, sliding it along as you mark the border. If you're not sewing your pieces together, other suggestions for assembly, including yarn, string, wire, pipe cleaner, fasteners, staples, or glue. If you are using paper, you could glue the blocks to a larger background. Now you are ready to create your block. We would like you to reflect on a time when you experienced grief or loss and express yourself through this art making project. For our activity tonight, we will be working with 8.5 by 11-inch paper and whatever media you have available to use. The music will be playing softly in the background so that you can relax and create. If you have any questions, you can either type them in chat or you can unmute yourself and ask it. We will give you 10 minutes to work, and we will give you a time check at 5 minutes and 2 minutes before we stop creating. We will leave these prompts up on the screen for you. Hold your paper vertically, portrait, as this is how it will be used when you assemble it. Take risks and try new materials, new techniques, stamp, write, paint, sew, and use your creativity to plan, or go rogue for an interesting composition. Remember to incorporate the red thread somewhere in your design. It can be woven through your design, but must stay within your borders. Red thread should touch 2 of the 4 borders. Okay, above all else, relax and have fun. Ready, set, go. Katie, please start the music. Now, I know you probably didn't have enough time to finish your block, but I'd like to walk you through the rest of the lesson. So far, we've been working individually. Now it's time for collaboration. Collaboration is so important because the individual becomes part of the group. The process of laying out the blocks emphasizes the importance of each person's contribution. If one block is missing, it leaves a hole. Once everyone has completed their individual blocks, determine how many total art blocks you have for the collaborative art club. Add extra blocks or blank blocks that can be later designed with the name of the masterpiece, the school, the date, teacher and student signatures, even quotes. Lay the blocks vertically in columns of blocks across. For example, if you have 70 blocks, you might arrange 10 blocks across and 7 blocks down. Don't worry about the arrangement right now. Once the blocks are laid out, work as a team to arrange the blocks in aesthetically pleasing design. More detailed information about the block layout is in the actual lesson plan. The collaboration becomes very interesting and revealing at this point. Try to notice the role people assume as they collaborate. Some people are right in there moving the blocks around. Others are calling out suggestions, and still others are content to stand back and watch, sometimes making comments under their breath. So there are discussion prompts in the guide that you can use for your students when you finish the art making. You can choose the ones that are most appropriate for your class. For example, how did you feel about having to stay within the borders as you drew the first step in creating your art block? Or is it more comfortable when you have more choices or limited choices? Another one might be, how did it feel to see your work publicly displayed? And what do you think you might have done differently on your individual piece or on the collaborative work? Next.
I think another good point about this lesson is respecting where everyone is in that grief process. So when you look at everybody's work at one time, you can see that, you know, what they experienced and their healing is at different things help them cope as well. And so we have to be respectful of where they are. And so I think these discussion prompts can help translate that art in life. And so when Adrienne said some people are just quiet and won't actually talk about where the block should be positioned, I think we have to respect the people who don't want to be bold and speak at that moment. At the end of each one of the lessons in the guide, we have a variety of different prompts. And here's some of them. When you teach this lesson with your students, you can engage in conversation with them, but you can also kind of reflect on how does this activity foster resilience in students? In what ways can it help them express themselves in a safe manner? And when doing a similar project with your art class, how can you ensure success for your students? And what modifications or adaptations would you need to make to personalize this and make this meaningful for your own students? And so again, in making art, when we make art individually and then we contribute to a whole, if we talk about that afterwards, the power of us coming together to help each other through a difficult time in whatever respectful way that the individuals need. We can't reduce the risk often with our students, but we can strengthen their protective factors. So creating art independently and collaboratively helps them to feel connected and a sense of belonging, which is one factor of that fosters resilience. Other factors are that pride that you see with your students when they've accomplished something. Resourcefulness, knowing what their resources are and how to use them. Creativity, persistence, metacognition, vision for the future, sense of purpose, a sense of humor, and optimism. I want to share with you a few alternatives for the collaborative art making project. On the left, we created them out of paper and we actually used sticky notes for the border. So we used repetitive lines because sometimes repetition or going back to our routine when we've experienced grief and loss can really help ground us. So we mimic that with those, the borders, but we actually created the borders and then we traded them with other students in the class. And then we talked about, did that feel vulnerable to give up some of your squares? And did you feel stronger to collect squares from the others in your class or in your table? So we created symbols, again, representing their sources of strength in times of crisis with the inquiry prompt, what helps me cope during challenging times? And then on the right is another alternative to assembling a work of art without sewing. This collaborative quilt was made with cardboard scraps and construction paper, with each square attached by a red thread. And that was actually the student's choice to choose a red thread. This was done the day after September 11th to help my students process that historic event. We created symbols in this collaborative work with the prompt, what do we need to do now to get through this? And as you can see, the students revealed hope, coming together, and faith as some of the things to help them get through this difficult time.
The challenge for this art quilt, which was created by the New York State Art Teachers Association, was "This is us. Your challenge will be the red thread." Their quilt was made using Smart Fab and a plethora of art materials. The art teachers told us how much they enjoyed and appreciated having a chance to just create art with other art teachers in a non-competitive, supportive environment. Next. We believe in celebrating creative accomplishments. At the completion of the Red Thread project, validate your students' accomplishments. Some suggestions would be to display the completed Red Thread project in the school or the community. Take pictures to document the project. Be sure every participant gets a picture of the completed project. Hold a celebration, virtually or in person, to share the work with your community, like an art show opening. Or raffle the Red Thread project to raise funds for a school or community project. I'd like to go back for a second to documenting the projects. Sometimes we take pictures during the actual process of making the project. You have to be very careful about students' privacy. If they choose not to have their picture taken or don't have permission to have their picture taken, you have to be very careful to respect this. Okay, before we go to the takeaways, I'd like to share with you an episode from my classroom. I had brought in books and all kinds of samples to have my students make sculptures. We were using a I can't even think of the name of it right now. I apologize. But anyhow, they were going to make a sculpture that was sort of inspired by African art. And one of the students said to me, Miss, I want to make a tombstone. And I said, a tombstone? Why do you want to make a tombstone? And he said, somebody in his family had passed away and that they didn't have the money to buy a tombstone. So I said to him, well, sure, you can make a tombstone. And a couple of the other kids joined in and said they wanted to do it too. But I said, but you know, a tombstone is just a slab. You know, what about a memorial? Have you ever seen any memorials? Have you been to a cemetery and seen some really nice memorials? And we talked about, you know, things we might have seen in a cemetery, and we talked about the Washington Memorial and the Lincoln Memorial, and we talked about, you know, any memorials they might have had in their neighborhood. And so we moved away from calling it a tombstone to calling it a memorial. Now, sometimes when you have something like this happen in your class, you have to go to plan B. So their project then became whatever type of a memorial they wanted it to be. And if it was inspired by the African art, that's fine. If it was just something they felt very personally about, that was fine too. And it just was such a nice experience for them. They were so proud of them at the end and so happy with it. And it meant a lot to them. And sometimes we think, well, we have to stick to the program. I don't believe in that. I think that you have to work with your students in the time frame that you're in with them. Okay, and that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Adrienne. Thanks for sharing that story. I'd also like, before we do the key takeaways, I know you're not finished with your square, but if it would be so wonderful to see them, if you feel comfortable holding it up to the screen, and I'll hold mine up just so that you can see it. And I would love it if anyone else wants to share theirs. Oh, wonderful. You guys made a lot of progress. And I want to say that.
All right, you can all leave them up for 1 minute. I would love to get a screenshot of it. Dina, would you mind taking away the screen share for a second so I could open up the gallery?
Oh, these are great.
And while I mentioned to you, thank you so much for sharing. While I mentioned to you that I don't require that students talk about their trauma with the whole group. During the art making, they often share, which is totally fine. I just don't want to put them on the spot and make them relive the trauma. But they're usually eager to talk about the trauma, what helped them through the trauma through their art, like in what symbols they created that brought them strength and joy. And so I think that's a safer way to accept where they are and allow them to express themselves verbally or artistically, but it's not a requirement. So now what I'd like you to do is two things, and we're going to do this at the same time. I want you to type in the chat one thing that you might be able, that you gained or learned or thought about or were reminded of that you want to take back to your own practice. And if you would type that in the chat, and we'll give you a few minutes to do that. And then after a few minutes, if you have questions for me or Adrienne, then that would be a good time to you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask away. And I hope you had something you
Oh,
can.
wow, these are great.
I love that it's so important for us to honor our artistic self so that we can address our own social emotional learning and healing while we're helping our students. if you don't mind, I'm going to read a few of these. Reminder of the power of unity and empathy, to connect with others, planning a hope quilt, focusing on what makes us strong. I love this. I remember that jazz is relaxing, and a good transition. Weaving with pipe cleaners, yes. And you can be really students can be really creative with that red thread. Are they going to use yarn or paint or markers? The process is more important than the outcome. We're all a work in progress, aren't we? Turning something individual into a collaborative work. And understanding the triggers that your students may face and being respectful of that. Since we're not art therapists, we can focus on resilience through art. We know art is magical. But what specifically is it that we do? When we teach art, do we say, wow, you were really persistent with that. You didn't give up until you found that artistic solution. Being able to use those words for them as well, and how being creative or resourceful is a real asset or a strength. I encourage you to read all of these things in the chat so that you can borrow from everyone else that's here, and I appreciate you sharing those. Now I would love for you to open it up for questions from you. We're here for you now.
Hi, Adrienne and Donalyn, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, apologies for the background noise. My kids, sorry, I'm going to move out of the room, are 4 levels of referral out of the DOE, and I tried a collaborative quilt last week, and they threw a fit because they were so pissed off at not having the usual wide open choice that they get. So we got through it with a lot of, a fair amount of throwing and, kind of making a mess because they were so mad that they had to do it. But we got a lot of good work. We put it together and now they're so excited to see it. But do you have any suggestions for giving more direction in a classroom where kids have been used to having choice?
Well, I actually like to give them a lot of choice in the process, but I know that if you want to, arrange it a certain way, then there are some parameters that you might be looking for. But sometimes if they break the rules of those parameters, it creates a really good conversation afterwards about maybe it's interesting if the orientation is different, or maybe it's becomes more interesting if there's different materials than what you're required. But there is a balance with the structure of the process and then allowing choice and creativity. And I also think, though, Kristen, that lends itself to a conversation about life. There's sometimes in life when we have complete freedom of choice, and other situations and other times in life when there are boundaries like we talked about. And how does those boundaries make you feel, and how can we overcome them? And maybe it sounds like what you did naturally, because you're a wonderful teacher, is you sort of were flexible enough to kind of figure out how to make it successful and work around that. So Adrienne, do you have some other comments?
I think you did a great job explaining to Donalyn. Thank you. Do we have more questions? We have somebody said limiting materials can be framed as here is your challenge. That's true. The other thing that I do too is I give them choices, but I limit their choices. They get to work with what I've, give them an array to work with. And then they can choose from that array. If they ask for something special that's not out, because I really had to watch my materials, particularly working with difficult students like you're working with. I found that they wasted too much. They'd go from one thing to another instead of focusing. And so I found that by limiting their choices to the materials I wanted them to use, that helped a lot.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think Maureen had a question too.
Yeah, I was just wondering if how you think it would be handled if a student, because I know all of us have students that have dealt with traumatic events, and what if it ever happened where a student just got so visibly and upset and couldn't do the project. How do you deal with that?
Okay, I'll answer that. Okay, I always have an area set aside for students to take a break. I don't call it a timeout, it's take a break. It's an area where they can just sit and relax for a while. And after I get everybody going, I go and sit with them and I say, you know, I can tell you're having a bad day today. How can I help you? And just giving them an opportunity to talk to you if they want to. If they don't, I have activities for them to do. I have magazines that they can tear paper out of, because just that ripping is something. If they're frustrated, they're upset, you know, they can rip. And I'll tell them, rip some pages out that have white lettering on a black background. Or, you know what I need from this magazine? I need skin tones. Can you pull out some pages that have skin tones on? And it gives them a purpose, but also gives them permission to work out some of their feelings. And I have other activities too that they can use to relax. And I'll tell them, you know, you can come back and join us when you're ready. If you're not ready today, then you'll come back tomorrow and work on it. But while you're taking your time out, you need to be respectful of everybody else. So sometimes we just need a break. And rather than having a kid come in who's upset about something or really, you know, brokenhearted over something and insisting that they work, it could be something they've been working on beautifully for, you know, a couple of weeks, and they'll come in and make one little mistake and they'll tear it up. You don't want that to happen. That's setting them up for failure. So you want to give them an opportunity to get themselves under control and to move forward. Did that help any?
And I think what you described, Adrienne, is very respectful of where they are, having a space or a Zen den, but I let students self separate. So if any students at any time, if they felt like they were getting frustrated or emotional, they could remove themselves. And then that invitation that Adrienne said, you're welcome to come back at any time. So it wasn't always where I asked them to, why don't you take a break and come over here? They knew that they could do that to go self-regulate. And I think having that respect and I love the targeted task to get them focused on one thing, like the paper tearing that Adrienne mentioned, helps to reset their emotions, as well as physical and embodied movement can help them as well. Good questions. Thank you for asking those.
Okay, so Becky have paper and pens available to write a word or phrase that describes what are you worried about, sad about, frustrated. They can then ball it up and bind it with yarn, cord, thread, have a large bowl or glass that they can put the bad in there and set it aside. That's a great idea for a while when they're in a safe space in the art room. Like I said earlier, the art room needs to be a safe environment, both emotionally and physically.
And I think we as teachers know when a student walks in the door and they're having a bad day. It's often obvious, but not always. And so sometimes a simple task of, when I have students make their bookmarks, I have them make one side of it when they're having the best day ever, and what colors and shapes would you create that name tag? And the other side of their name tag is, what if you were having the worst day ever? What colors and shapes and what would your name tag look like? And when they come into class, I even model this in my university classes at University of Texas. And then if they come in and they're just not having a good day, they don't have to tell us what's going on. And I don't go up to them and say, what happened today or what's going on? Because maybe they're trying to self-regulate and try to get involved in the class. They just have to show us their name tag if they want to. And then when we see that as their community, as their tribe, it's like, oh, Adrienne's not having the best day, I say to myself, not out loud. So if there's a limited red markers and I see her reach for the red marker, we as a community are going to let her have the marker and be kind to her. We're going to show her a little extra kindness today because she's already reached out to us and said that she needed it. She didn't have to say anything. She didn't have to disrupt or be rude. She just turned her name tag to let us know she wasn't having the best day. And then it's our job as her community to kind of just be kind and help her through it.
Well, I think that we have to move along now. I want to thank you for coming, and we want to end with a list of resources that may be helpful to you in addition to the Healing Through Creativity Guide. Donalyn and I co-authored, we want to go to the next slide, please. Okay. Donalyn and I co-authored a book, Art for Children Experiencing Psychological Trauma, and another, Working with Students Who Have Anxiety, Creative Connections and Practical Strategies. We also recently completed a chapter on psychological trauma for the revised edition of Reaching and Teaching Students with Special Needs Through Art, edited by Beverly Levitt-Gerber and Doris Gay, which we hope will be available this spring. So between the guide and these resources, we hope that this will help you along.
Well, we want to really thank you for being here, but mostly thank you for the work that you do every day. And just like the symbolism of the Red Thread Project, we hope that this is the beginning of our relationship, since we're all colleagues in our various settings. We hope that you'll keep the conversation going and contact us. We hope to see you at NAEA in the future, but also you're going to be getting an email about Flipgrid. And so if you would just scan with your phone and upload your image so that we can see it and comment on it, and you can see everybody else's, because I know everybody didn't finish and some people are going to want to go work on it some more, but we would love to be part of your tribe and your community, and we would like to be a resource for you as you move forward. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you to Scholastic Art and New York Live for inviting us to be here with you.
And isn't it great that these resources, the Healing Through Creativity Guide and this webinar, are free? And you can come back and revisit it anytime you want, and you can download that healing guide. I mean, it's terrific.
Thank you both so much, Donalyn and Adrienne, and thank you to all of everyone who joined us tonight. That was an incredible workshop. I know that I learned a lot, and I really appreciated hearing from everyone. I did post the link to Flipgrid in the chat, but I will post it again. We hope that you all will continue joining us there. We have some prompts up already where you can start, as Donalyn and Adrienne said, holding up images of what you created today. And we'll be launching a couple of other discussion boards tomorrow where you can continue engaging with each other and start your own threads where you may want to share whatever it is that you want to share, whether it's venting about something in the classroom, asking for suggestions, sharing a lesson plan that went really well. It's your space, and we hope that you can find some community there to continue connecting. And one last note before we hop off today about the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. So we will be emailing out all of the resources that we shared today, as well as a link to a brief evaluation about the event that we would appreciate you filling out. As we mentioned earlier, the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards are currently open for entries, and any of your students creating works about grief and bereavement who are in grades 7 through 12, ages 13 and up, are eligible to enter them in the awards for the opportunity to earn scholarships up to $1,000. So please feel free to reach out to us with any questions, whether it be about this workshop, other upcoming events, the New York Life Award, or just other ways that your students can be rewarded and recognized for their creativity. You can email us at info@artandwriting.org. And I noticed a few people in the chat asking about professional development activity, letters certifying your attendance today for professional development. Please email us at info@artandwriting.org if you would like one, and we would be happy to provide it. If you could include your first name, last name, and the address of your school so that we can make the letter out to you, that would be wonderful. And we can email that back to you. And let's see, Dina, am I forgetting anything?
Yes, Katie, there are questions up here about how they can access the recording.
Oh, thank you, Adrienne. After today's session, we need to trim up the video a little bit to take out some of the activity sessions, and then we'll be posting it on YouTube. So we'll email you right after today's session with the link to all the resources that we went over today, and we'll follow up either tomorrow or the following day with a link to the video. And again, if you need anything, you can email us at info@artandwriting.org. And I also wanted to share with you that we have some other events coming up this fall, all free workshops and webinars that are open to educators and students. Next week, we have a workshop on creating editorial cartoons if you or any of your students are interested in attending. And the following week on Tuesday, October 26th, we have a workshop on processing collective grief, where Jill Zaccardi, a teaching artist, will be leading us through an activity. Again, this is open to students and educators, so your students can join as well. They'll be actually going through an activity to start creating a new piece of artwork about something that they're working through. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Donalyn and Adrienne. And I'm happy to hang out for a few minutes if anyone has questions about the Scholastic Awards. Otherwise, have a wonderful evening, and we hope to hear from you soon.